Welcome everyone to the webinar. This is our third webinar in a series dedicated to the future of work, brought to you by ServiceRocket. My name is Sam Miller and I'm the co-host of this webinar. In this webinar, we're going to talk about messaging apps like Slack, which are touted as collaboration and productivity boosters. Now we have too many emails and too many messages, and employees say they feel overwhelmed, anxious, less productive, and unable to disconnect from work. Bill has some great information about how to combat this, and I think will be beneficial for all of us to hear. On this agenda, we're going to talk about the elements of Slack fatigue and its root causes, hybrid work design principles that prioritize trust, inclusiveness, and positive work-life balance. And finally, ways to implement these design principles in workplace for Meta to minimize real-time work anxiety. A bit about ServiceRocket. ServiceRocket is the leading tech-enabled services company that accelerates the growth of software companies and their customers. By maximizing software adoption and return on investment, ServiceRocket provides an ecosystem of capabilities that spans software implementation, adoption, retention, and expansion. A trusted partner to Atlassian, Facebook, Meta, digital AI, and companies around the world, ServiceRocket is headquartered in Palo Alto, California. Our diverse workforce of Rocketeers in Australia, Canada, Chile, India, Malaysia, the UK, and the US consistently think team and delight the customer. And next slide, please. And just a little bit about Meta. Workplace is the modern enterprise-ready collaborative communication platform built to change the way people communicate at work and foster community. Workplace has grown to over 7 million globally dispersed paid users since its launch in 2016. And as a company, we've adopted Workplace internally 5 years ago and has become essential to our hybrid work environment ever since. Next slide. And yes, a little bit about our host, Bill Cushard. He's the executive director and global head of the future of work practice at ServiceRocket. He specializes in learning and development, human performance technology, and agile transformations. And on top of all that, Bill is the host of Helping Sales Radio and the author of author of The Art of Agile Marketing, a practical roadmap for implementing Kanban and Scrum in Jira and Confluence. He was instrumental in the adoption of Workplace from Meta at ServiceRocket 5 years ago, and with all of his experience helping companies adopt disruptive software through learning, change management, and communications. Without further ado, let's hear from our host, Bill Cushard, everybody.
Oh, you didn't really do that. Hey, Sam, you said Kanban, not Kanban. That means you're in the in crowd.
Oh, I'm a cool guy. I like it.
That's very good. Okay, let's get started. I'm very much excited about this. In the pre-show, we were sort of commenting about our, let's say, one-sided, biased, controversial topic by accusing Slack of doing something to us and causing us fatigue. And this webinar sort of is about that, but it isn't really about that. Slack is a tool, and you can overuse or misuse or not use any tool for any reason. But there are some principles behind this thing called Slack fatigue that exist in our workplaces that cause anxiety for people and cause people to have this sort of, I don't know, emotional or mental fatigue where breaks are needed, but we can't take them and there's pressure to respond. And we're going to talk about all of this and try to come to terms with it, talk about ways to mitigate it and or overcome it, and then talk about some things we can do in workplace that might be things that would be different from messaging apps like Slack that can help us, let's say, overcome this thing called Slack fatigue. We can start with what Slack is. And I go back to the olden days of the internet when we had things called chat, and then we had things called instant messengers, right? And then we had something called real-time messaging, which now that changes it because the word real-time is in the name of the chat app type. And then hyper messaging. So all of these terms are communicating something to us. They are communicating that this needs to happen now, that it's real time, it's synchronous, and you can't wait to respond to a message because it's a now thing. And in my opinion, if there isn't yet an official definition of, quote, Slack fatigue, the fatigue part of this definition is that decision we have to make 17 times a day or more, do I respond now or can I wait till later? Do I have to respond now or can I wait till later? And these messaging apps that are chat apps, hyper messaging apps, instant messengers, real-time chat apps, they imply by definition, respond now. That doesn't mean we can't voluntarily say, I'm not going to respond now. It doesn't mean I can't log off and not have it on for an hour while I work on, I don't know, deep work, for example. But by nature of the app, it sort of implies now. And we've all been in the meeting with, let's say, a customer or a colleague or a boss, and we're having a video call and we see in our browser window, one of the 1700 tabs we have open, in the tiny one, we see the Slack indicator blinking, right? New message. We've all seen that. And we've all been distracted by that. Even if we didn't click over to look, it's in our head. Oh my gosh, there's a chat. I wonder who it's from. I wonder who it's for. I wonder if I should respond. Should I look at it now? And now the customer on the other end just said something and you have to say to yourself, could you repeat that to the customer you're on the video call with? And now this is real life, right? So this is the kind of thing that I am describing as Slack fatigue, because I'm constantly worrying about when I should respond, should I look, should I not look, can I take a break, and all of that. Basically what we're talking about today. And the only thing we do today, if you think about it, to solve the problem is one of the things here. We write a blog post, we say, hey, just don't check Slack. And we used to do this when email was becoming part of our lives too. We would say, oh, just don't check Slack or email or messages before a certain time of day. And the idea would be, you should start your day off with your important non-urgent work, your quadrant 2 work. We'll talk about that quadrants in a little while, but your quadrant 2 work, so you don't get distracted by the day. So that's nice. But how many of us actually do that? We really don't check messages before a certain time of day. Maybe you are all more enlightened than I am. It's difficult to do. Maybe we could just give advice, mute your notifications so you don't get any. And trust me, I have been using Workplace every day since 2016, a long time. And I turned off all of my notifications in Workplace, not even the bells, nothing. I have to log in and check to see, and I still get distracted by it, right? So the mute button by itself isn't everything. And, the third level of advice is just set your away status so people know you're away, so they won't send you messages. But guess what? People send them anyway, because they might be thinking, I'll send a message to Sam because I need to get it out of my head. I don't want him to respond now, so I'll just send it now. But then Sam sees it and says, oh, Bill sent me a message. Should I respond now? Should I not? Can I wait? And even if Sam knows I've said 17 times, you don't have to respond to my messages urgently, there's still something in someone's head that said, maybe I should respond to this one urgently. So we all know together, this is a thing. And these are the things that cause Slack fatigue. And so what does Slack do? Well, they give us advice because they're trying to help. And so they say, hey, you're having Zoom fatigue, right? That was the first fatigue we had at work, right? The Zoom fatigue. And so then Slack comes out and says, you can mitigate, let's say, reduce, minimize Zoom fatigue, stop having meetings for every little thing, go into a chat, take your team offline and chat. Okay. And we're going to talk about this later, but if video calls are synchronous in real time, so is chat. So I say, in some sense, what's the difference? We're going from one real-time type of interaction with our peers and our teams and our customers to another. What got better? Or I might say, what's the difference?
Wait, so you're talking about, this article is talking about holding meetings in Slack. I couldn't do it. Like, I would go crazy trying to keep up with all the messages and responses and back and forth, especially when the chime goes off like 100 times a minute. How are people doing that?
Yeah, that's a challenge. And, they say in this article, move your online meeting from quote Zoom to Slack. But the intent, if you really read what's in the article, and you all could Google this and find it, but what the nature of it is, it's not really a meeting. It's a different kind of a conversation that you could have with your team. but it is still real time. So instead of, let's say, being on your video or audio and a microphone and listening and talking and interacting, you shift to this thing where now it's fingers on the keyboard and it's waiting for responses. So you could type a response and watching the feed with 3 other people chatting about an idea, and you're just observing. So in some sense, it is not different at all if you look at it as a synchronous real-time now event or exchange. It is different because I don't have to have my camera on, right? And I don't have to pay attention quite as much. I might sit in a chair in my living room more comfortably than at my desk on a video. So there are differences, but I'm going to go back to the concept of it's still real time. It's still now, right? So what's the difference? And we kind of want to go beyond that trade-off between, should we do a real-time exchange on a video call or a real-time exchange in a chat, right? I'm making the argument, and we do that the argument for me is that's the same thing, even though it's, it's the same thing as far as I'm concerned. Okay. So when we install these chat apps, we imply to the world that there's a contradiction that we are introducing to you, because you've all been involved in these conversations where your company and or your manager talks about the importance of work-life balance. We've all had that discussion. We've heard our CEOs and all hands meetings say how important it is. It's probably written into our new job descriptions that are on our website that we're trying to hire people for. We say flexible work schedule, we say work-life balance, and we say all that. And yet at the same time, we install a primary communication tool that by definition is a real-time respond now hyper messaging app. So to me, I look at this and I say, well, that by definition is a contradiction. How can you say to people, feel free to take time away from your desk or office or whatever to either work on deep work for work or go for a walk or just sit in a chair and stare at the wall for 20 minutes between, whatever you would do. And then provide everyone an app message that ding, 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 ding all day long, right? And if I could be all philosophical, there is a concept in philosophy for all you philosophy majors out there, this law of non-contradictions. And this law, Aristotle and Plato and all those philosophers, sort of came up with this over time. By definition, contradictions cannot exist. Both can't be true, right? It can't be cold and hot, at the same time. If you're in Massachusetts in December and a nor'easter's coming through, it will be a contradiction to say, gosh, it's warm outside and the snow is blowing. Cannot both be true. But we say that to our organization all the time. We say, here's a real-time messaging app, respond when necessary, and work-life balance matters. So to me, one of the questions we ask our clients, our customers in engagements is, especially to managers in our manager training in the context of using workplace, we ask, which is it? Do you want your people to respond to you in real time? Or do you want them to have the flexibility to make a choice to say, I'm offline because I'm working on this report, leave me alone? And it almost is a black and white issue. And it really isn't. There's gray areas. There's always a need to have to respond to urgent things, right? However, there are also times when it really isn't urgent, right? And so what you think is urgent might not be what I think is urgent. And that's where all the messiness is, obviously. If you believe in that law of non-contradiction, then you believe that what's on the slide here is a choice that we have to make. And us as managers, as leaders of teams, we're going to talk about this soon, we have to give our teams permission to make this choice. And we have to make them believe that it's okay to do this. And if we are individual contributors, we also have to take some agency in our lives to say, you know what? I am not available because at 1 o'clock, I'm going to the park and I'm going to walk my dog for 20 minutes because I have a park in my neighborhood and I'm going to go down there and do that. But we are sending this message. So we ask managers, which is it? And of course, there's all these discussions about, well, sometimes we have to respond and sometimes we don't. And these are our choices that we have to make. And it's not always easy. So, Sam, do you have a question?
Sorry, I muted myself. If there was supposed to be work-life balance, how do people decide when to respond to messages, now or later? And also, how do they decide what they should answer now or later?
I'm going to talk about this more in the next couple of slides. So let's pin that question. That's a good question that came in. And there's no obvious and easy answer to that question, but I think it's 2 slides from now, we'll talk about those trade-offs. Is that okay, Sam? We can do that?
Sounds like a plan.
So we're going to come back to that. I just want to say one concluding comment about the Slack fatigue. To me, the fatigue is this constant energy I have to expend in my head to say, should I respond? The question that you asked, Sam, should I respond to this one or not? Can I log off of my messaging apps, whatever they are, Workplace, Slack, any of them, and be okay with working on the deep work thing I have to work on and not feel pressure, anxiety, or fear that by not being online for 90 minutes, there will be repercussions by teammates, bosses, whatever, right? And worrying about that is what causes the fatigue, right?
Gotcha.
As a side topic, Sam, it's like there is some research on brain science, how much energy our brain uses, like calories and all that. It's like, how many calories do we burn thinking about all this? I have no idea.
A lot.
Must be a lot. Yeah, must be a lot. Okay, so yes, we called this webinar, we talking about Slack fatigue. And if we agree that Slack is a chat app or chat functionality, let's talk about what chat is. And when we get into Workplace as an alternative, Workplace is chat plus many, many, many other choices and things that you can do and work and not use chat. Whereas a lot of other chat apps are only chat or primarily chat. Whereas Workplace is primarily not chat and primarily other modes of communication. And oh yes, over here, there is also chat. So, but we'll talk about that. Chat is for, and this might be the most important thing to really understand, especially as a manager of people, so that you know how to communicate to your teams, which mode of communication is appropriate. And Sam, we're going to go back to your question. When do we decide to, this leads us up to that question. Chat is for synchronous communication. And if I don't have the definition on the screen, but synchronous, for those of you who don't know it, that means synchronous means same time together, like on a phone call in real time at the same time, right? So that could be a video call or a telephone call or a chat. Chat implies you and I are chatting real time right now on Messenger, right? Or WeChat or Work Chat or Slack, okay? It implies we need instant responses. The things we should do in chat should be low complexity tasks. They should be things that don't need context. Because if you have to say to me in a chat, remember that thing we were talking about up in the stream in our chat 2 days ago, after 7,700 messages have gone through, I'm supposed to scroll up and remind myself. I mean, you better not require context in your chat messages if you want people to participate. These things should be urgent. Hey, it's, things are on here, right? These are the things that chat is for. Workplace, the team at Workplace created this ebook that we have cited numerous times and lays this out quite well about the difference between what a chat might be for and what, let's say, a workplace post is for, which we'll talk about. But just to me, when I look at chat, I look at it through the lens of a synchronous communication method. Once you really understand that and internalize it, it's easier to make the decision, Sam, that you asked about when I should respond and when I shouldn't, etc. So we're going to get to that. For people if you're in the chat, are you familiar with the 4 quadrants of time management in the chat? Yes or no? You must all know this. I have a love-hate relationship with this quadrant. And when I think about how to prioritize work, I go back to this and I say, how can I spend most of my time in up here in the upper right-hand quadrant? This is called quadrant 2, right? Important things that aren't urgent. That's probably where we should be spending most of our time. And yet you and I know together in this room, nobody's listening, nobody else, just us, that the most of us spend most of our time in quadrants 1 and 3. That's probably not a good thing, but we do it anyway, because in the olden days, we would say the light is flashing on the phone to indicate a voicemail message is waiting for me. Sort of like the new indicator on our browser tab. But if we go back to the previous slide that said, define what chat is this. The things that we do in chat are quadrant 3 activities. So we're going to get to your question, Sam, that came through, because this sets that up. If we can believe together and understand that chat, messaging, and conversations in chat are quadrant 3 activities, it relieves us of the pressure of knowing what to do next, because these are not important. Okay, quote, not important. This is where the judgment call comes in, right? Because when your boss chats you, it's important, right? Okay. So, we have to acknowledge that dynamic. But if you think about it in real time, the things we do in chat, and if you go back to your chats, whatever chat apps you use, these things really are not important and urgent things, right? So it is, hey, do you want to meet me for lunch at the burrito shop in an hour? That's urgent, but that's not important, right? I mean, maybe lunch with a colleague is important. Sometimes it is. Okay. But just think about the things that are on this quadrant right now on the screen versus the things you actually do in chat. We have to accept that primarily that is quadrant 3 activity. If we can accept that. So now to your question, Sam, how does someone make the choice to use a chat or to respond or to do it in a post? And so I have 2 answers to that question. Number 1, I have an answer for managers and I have an answer for individual contributors. And it's not a perfect answer. So for managers, you are by definition the boss and have some authority over how your team works in terms of the standards and the guidelines and your modus operandi as a team. As a people leader and a team leader, it is your responsibility to set the tone for how people can make that decision, right? It's up to you to say, it's okay to go to the park and set your status and say, I'm at the park, I'll be back at 2, right? And you have to set the stage that for the rest of the team to see that and not be uncomfortable that I went to the park to walk my dog and I'll be back at 2, right? And you therefore can't send a message to that person during the time when the status says, I'm at the park. Like the manager has a lot of things to do to set the stage for that. And so for individual contributors, the answer to the question is you have to have a little bit of agency and you have to be a little bit brave. And you also at the same time have to say, I'm going to be at the park. I'm going to put my status. I'm going to go to the park and I'm not going to respond. Even if I see a message, maybe someone chats a message right before I'm about to leave on my park trip, my walk my dog. You have to say, you know what? I'm going to respond to Sam when I get back. Just say that to yourself in your head and be okay with it. Right. So what's tricky here is, I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg kind of a scenario, but on the one hand, the manager has to set the stage and make it okay for people to do that. And us as individual contributors also have to be brave enough, because I'm using the word brave intentionally. We also have to be brave enough to not respond, right? And be okay that, people in workplace saw my face, so they know I saw the message, and be okay with not responding. Because Sam, he's laughing because I see his message. But sometimes I check the message when I'm walking my son to the bus for school and I can't respond, but I look anyway, and I shouldn't look because I'm with my son and it's a whole thing. But
I try to hide myself. I not look at it so they don't know. Like I see the notification come in, but I don't look at it so they don't see that I saw it.
Well, right. Okay. So, fatigue. It's like the games we play. You have to
Yeah.
think about that. And that's not good. That's not healthy, right?
Hmm.
Okay. If you have any questions about what we're talking about in this section, feel free to type those into the chat. The trade-offs between making decisions to respond or not and being okay with responding, feel free to type those into the chat. Okay. So I'm just going to go back to this one more time and say that the dilemma we have that causes Slack fatigue, which is, should I respond now or can I wait? Right? Should I use a chat functionality to imply a real-time messaging interaction? Or can I, in workplace, for example, use a post instead of a chat message, which implies an asynchronous, where you can respond later approach? What makes us, let me say it this way, the acceptance that a synchronous mode of communication is a quadrant 3 activity, and it's okay to leave it in the quadrant 3 and understand it is urgent, yes, but really it's not important. To accept that helps us as either managers of teams or as individual contributors answer Sam's question about, should I respond or not? When should I know when to respond or not? And when should I, let's say, use a post, which we're going to talk about in a minute, versus a chat. Okay. Acceptance of quadrant 3 activity matters. Okay. So now that we have set up the problem and what we have been trying to do to solve the problem, let's go into a different kind of a solution at the principle level. So before we start talking about what could be done in workplace, let's talk about this at a higher level. So how do we really solve this problem of fatigue, of synchronous fatigue? We said Slack fatigue in the title, but if you think about it, it's really a problem of synchronous fatigue. So maybe the next webinar, Sam, we'll do synchronous fatigue. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we did talk about this in our previous webinar when we talked about hybrid work design ideas. And I won't necessarily go through all of these. We're going to spend time on one of these in the interest of time. And the one we're going to focus on is this principle of default trust, right? If we are working in a hybrid work environment or a remote work environment or any work culture where we're not always all in the same conference room for the meeting or in the same office for doing our task, then we are in a hybrid work environment and there are people all over and we don't know what everybody's doing and everyone isn't visible, quote, because they're in the office. You know, Sam is always in the office. He's always the first one to arrive and the last one to leave. And we don't know he's playing Tetris on his computer, but he's here. So people get credit for, and that's a kind of a mindset we have to get rid of. But back to the principle of default trust. It's our job as people managers to set the stage and help our team to develop these healthy boundaries, right? It's not a Slack problem. Okay, sure, we use the word Slack in the title. This is not a Slack problem. This really is a leadership problem to solve. Leadership is the answer to the problem, really. It's our job to set the stage, and our default response to everything in the world of our work is, I trust that the people on the team are doing their thing to contribute to the work we're doing, right? Because the outcome is what's necessary, not the physical presence by itself. It doesn't matter to me that Sam is always the first one in and always the last one to go. I don't care if he came in first or last, because I know that he came in at 10 this morning because before he took his kids to school, he did a little bit of work before they woke up so he could come in an hour later to do okay. Default trust. Okay. So let's talk about that some more. And we're going to get into some more specifics about what could be done in workplace, right? So if you think about this principle of default trust, the number one thing that has to happen is that we as team managers, we as people managers must set the stage. We've talked about that before. We have to lead it, right? We're going to show some examples. Our CEO, Rob Castaneda, he does this. He tells people, I'm going to donate blood and I'm going to be out of the office for 3 hours. Or he says, I'm going to the doctor or I'm going to lunch with, and he doesn't tell us all his details, but I mean, he posts in groups, he tells us when he's going to be offline. He's giving us permission to be offline at this point. He's not bragging that he's going out to lunch to the burrito shop with the fellow CEO to do CEO talk. He's giving us permission that we can do that sometimes too. And so when a manager and a CEO or a VP or a team lead is also going to the park, you can see what I do on my status sometimes. I say, you know what, I'm going out, right? I'm just communicating to my team that so that they can do it too. So it's not just okay to say, it's okay to have work-life balance, people, right? You have to live it yourself. And when other people do it, you also have to acknowledge that they've done it. You really have to communicate this over and over again. We have a cultural norm at ServiceRocket called Sunday Special. Okay. And our CEO heard about this on some podcast or from some other high energy type A founder, CEO type of a person. But basically the Sunday Special concept is you plan your week Sunday night, you plan out your whole week. Okay. There's nothing special about that by itself. And it could be Monday morning, it could be Friday afternoon, but the point is before the week starts that we should, and he communicates this, he does the hashtag Sunday Special all the time in our workplace instance. He did Sunday Special, right? And he has added this for us. He has said he wants to see us do our Sunday Special, not us doing it, but us. The result of it is I'm going to cancel a meeting on Thursday because I have a dentist appointment, and I'm going to proactively cancel the meeting on Thursday or reschedule it and say, Sam, I know we have our one-on-one at 9 a.m., but I have a dentist appointment. Let's reschedule. So it's proactive, because most of us, what do we do the night before we do that, right? Or maybe the morning of, and I'm guilty of it. Do you do it? I know you do it.
Oh,
yeah, I do it.
I started doing the Sunday Special, but I do it on Fridays, and it works. It actually really works.
And the point is, our CEO is telling us, I want you to say your daughter is going to the spelling bee and cancel these 3 meetings so I can do that, right? It's almost like that is more important than the doing of the Sunday Special and planning your week out. If that makes sense. So that's just one example. You don't have to do it that way, but the point is leadership is communicating the outcome that they want to see for you to prioritize your personal life, that you can reschedule or cancel a business meeting because you have something personal in your life to take care of. But the trade-off is, the agreement is, do that ahead of time, right? Be respectful of your peers, right? And say on a Sunday night or a Friday afternoon, Sam, like you do it, be respectful of your peers. That's the rule, right? Let's say, if there is one. So then you can read some of these on here. I'm going to skip to our wellness group. And let me just skip down to the status one first. I'll come back to the wellness group because Sam has some examples he wants to share. You saw on my slides earlier in the webinar, I said, setting your status is a solution that we tell people to do, which doesn't work. And yet I'm here saying, set your status. So you do want to communicate to your teams that you're off, right? No matter what. So you should set your status so that people know. So I'm not suggesting that doesn't work. I'm saying it's one of the tools in your toolbox that you can use to communicate that you are, let's say, doing something personal. Okay.
Thinking utility belt, like Batman, utility belt, one of the tools in utility belt.
Yes.
Oh.
Right. So it's like, that's a good comment actually, right? Because the point of this principle of default trust is you can't just say, I trust you. You can't just say that once, right? What's that?
You don't trust me, Bill?
I said I did.
Oh, okay. All right.
I said it once. So what you just heard us talking, that's the point, right, Sam? It's like, just because I said it once doesn't mean you believe it. And it doesn't mean I meant it. But if I say it repeatedly, let's say, or I do many of the things that are on this slide and other things too, right? To say, I trust you. And I trust you because I'm going out for a burrito with my wife on a Tuesday, even though I work at home, right? So, who goes out to lunch when you work at home anymore? Like we work in the office, we used to go out to lunch once in a while. And so we should bring back going out to lunch while working at home.
I like burritos.
Yes, sure. Okay, so one more thing is this communication of trust. We have something called a wellness group, and it used to be called it might have used to have been called the running group because some runners were in there. Then it was called the Rocketeer athlete group, and then we changed it to wellness group because not everyone was a runner and not everyone was an athlete, but everyone wants to be well. So anyway, the point is this group is designed specifically for us to share that this weekend on a Saturday, I went for a hike and I took a picture of the sunrise, right? It's like, so the whole company knows that Bill did that thing and wow, someone does something outside of work for once. That's a miracle kind of thing, right? And then more people do it. And then anyway, I'll stop this topic by saying, however you solve this problem of convincing your teams that they can have a work-life balance and they don't have to respond to every message in real time, you have to implement somehow this principle of default trust. Your default has to be, I trust you. And then someone has to earn their distrust, let's say, in a sense, is what we're really trying to communicate.
Makes sense.
So I think we're going to show some examples of specifically our wellness group, Sam.
Yeah, this is the leadership team here at ServiceRocket. They're really big promoters of physical and mental wellness. And in workplace, we have a group called the Rocketeer Wellness, which Bill just referenced a little while ago. It's really to help us reach our goals when we have events. To help us reach our goals, we have events to teach us about achieving our ultimate goal, whether that's physically or mentally, personally, professionally. In this workplace event, Jeff Lipschultz told us about his trek across 10 states, over 3,000 miles. Amazing. And 3,000 feet of climbing. Think 3 or 4 Mount Everests over a span of time, not at one time. But he also shared that what he learned about and setting and achieving a big, scary lifetime goal, which I really found very valuable. And then on the right side, there's also Rocketeer TV. Graham Betchert leads a ServiceRocket employees on a 6-part video series about living in the present instead of rushing towards a future result. Graham goes into detail on how you can bring yourself into the present and not letting stress and anxiety of future results get to you with simple things like going for walks to win. On the next slide, there's some more examples from our Rocketeer Wellness group with next one, Bill. With workplace, our team has been empowered to own their journey and to bring that side of their life to work. On the left, you'll see a post from Eng about a multi-day hike that he went on. He describes it as, hands down, this is the most difficult multi-day hike ever for me. He had a few bloody knocks on his leg, 10 leech bites, which is gross. And he also has some thorns and pricks in his hand. But ultimately, he described it as worth the pain and suffering. Which, to me, that's awesome. He brought more of himself to work. And on the right, there's a post from CEO Rob Castaneda. He's trained to become a triathlete. I don't know how he finds time to do it.
That's for sure.
And also runs a business, but he does. He has a race coming up in about 45 days, and he's still running. And he's still running while doing a 30-day mobility program to get him back into racing shape, even though he hurt his hip recently. What a trooper, huh? Seeing your leader being that transparent lets everyone know that they are real people too, just like the rest of us, which in turn brings us closer to him and also inspires us to keep pushing forward in the face of adversity.
Yeah. And so the intent here, as you can see, is that, we want to encourage people to share the things they're doing outside of work or at the lunchtime during the workday, because this also encourages others to say to themselves, well, I'm not going to ride a bike over the Rocky Mountains, but I can go for a walk in the park, or I can sit on the couch and read this book I've been wanting to read for a long time for 20 minutes on my lunch break, whatever. Right. So we want to share this. We as an organization are trying to communicate. It's okay. Life isn't all work, and everybody knows that. We all agree, But when you're working in a remote world, sometimes it's hard to know how to separate yourself from work and then walking down the hall to the living room to sit down and like separate yourself from it. And this is a way to do that. Okay, so last topic that I want to talk about is what makes workplace different. Because up until now, what we've really been doing is talking about the perils of focusing on a synchronous mode of communication, whether that's a video call or a real-time instant hyper messaging app. How is workplace any different? Because workplace has chat. So you might say, well, Bill, there's chat, right? There is a great chart that the workplace team had put together in this PDF on empowering hybrid teams. And we have referenced this content in previous webinars and blog posts. And in this webinar, we're focusing really on this chart, because what the workplace team does is, and I don't want you to read the whole chart yet. On my next slide, we're going to cover some of these. But the intent of this chart is to help us as workplace implementers, let's say, to help our teams understand what should we use workplace for, how should we work it, and under what circumstances, and how should we work things like posts versus chat and email versus video calls, because they each have their intent and they're each designed for a specific effective communication. And it's kind of important to understand that. Just like it's important to understand chat is synchronous, and it's important that chat is probably quadrant 3 activity, which is not important, but high urgent type of work. So that's why this here. I encourage you after the webinar to download this PDF from the link below, or if anyone wants to just email me directly, they can. I'll just send it to you. Right, bill.cushard@servicerocket.com. I'll just send you the PDF directly if you want. But I want to focus on a few items here. This is a good slide to take a screenshot of, because this is a focused version of that entire chart on the previous slide. Because this is the kind of slide that's divided up in certain ways where you can use this to communicate to your teams. This is how we should use these modes of communications for different things, right? And this is important. And before I go into this, I will tell you a story. We at ServiceRocket have been using Workplace since, I believe it's August 2016. So that's pushing what, 6 years now? And we have more than once drifted into a culture of primarily using work chat, and that using work chat becomes the primary means of communication. And we use the posts less and less and less. Okay. When somebody somewhere at the company notices this, and will make a comment somewhere, and they'll say, we're doing all chat. We're losing more asynchronous work style. We're losing context in our communication. We're losing the ability to search for that communication that we were talking about together 3 months ago, because it's up on the stream and the chat. We need to go back to primarily posts for communications, right? And so even us who does this for a living as a company, and even us who's done it for 6 years, and even us who helps advise companies who buy a workplace on how to get the most value out of it and implement best practices, we also fall into the gravity, or get pulled into the gravity of synchronous communication. Okay. With that said, we're all human, and that's what happens. But if we go back to this chart and we remind ourselves, okay, what is workplace chat for? Notice the 2 yellow columns, video calls and work chat. Understand these are both synchronous communication methods, right? That's the most important thing to really understand, because if we know they're for synchronous, by using it, we're implying you want an instant response, right? And you want people to respond now. If you don't want that, you should not do a chat. You should do a post. Like, it's just instant. So a very practical question. Sam, back to the question that came in earlier that you brought up. When do I do a post? And when can I respond? If you don't want to communicate an instant response, do a post in a group for the whole team to see. The second thing that's important is that you should try to minimize the one-on-one chat messages. Like Sam and I do this with each other a lot. We chat each other, messages to each other. I'll say, hey, Sam, I have the text for the next webinar on this link. Here you go. And then he has to take that and put it in a group to say, okay, entire marketing team, because someone's going to, write fix my copy, and someone else is going to add the image, and someone else is going to put it on the line, right? So I sent it to him, and now he has to do all this work, right? So a lot of times the instant message to each other in work chat is probably not the way to go. So there's these decisions we have to make. And I suggest, I'm not going to read everything on here, but I'm suggesting knowing when to use what matters, because then you could take some personal agency with your life and say, you know what, this message that I'm about to post, this question I have doesn't require this. So I'm going to use this method to do it. Okay, we're coming up on time. And if you have questions, please type those into the chat or into the Q&A box, and we will answer those. But before we get to questions, I know a couple are coming in. We have our next webinar. The landing page is ready. I swear it works. If you take your phone up to the screen right now, you'll get the page. You can register for our next one. Onboarding. We're going to talk about onboarding new people in a hybrid world. This matters. And then how we can use Workplace as part of that process. So that'll be fun. Sam, do you have any comments on this webinar that we're doing?
Yeah, so we're going to discuss why it's important now more than ever to get employees onboarded correctly, guidelines for designing effective remote hybrid employee onboarding, and solutions for using Workplace for Meta in your onboarding process. And like Bill said, you can scan the QR code on the left and take you right to the registration page, and you can sign up. And also, since you attended this webinar, you will also receive an email with a link to the next webinar as well, and a copy of the recording from this one.
Yep, very good, very cool. That way you can share it with your team. You could share the copy of the webinar in your workplace, in your organization, if you have it. Sam, have any questions come in?
Yeah, one question, I think we kind of touched upon it, but when does someone decide to use chat or to post in a group?
Okay. The simplest possible answer is, you look at your screenshot of this, and we're going to send the slides out, but you look at this and you say, I would ask first, I would ask two questions first. Do I require an instant response? Okay. But I would also ask myself, do I want to send the message to the receiver of my message that they need to respond to me right away? Because I could say to myself, I don't require an instant response, but I want to send the message anyway, so that Sam can respond to me later. But by doing that in chat, I'm sending a message, the between the lines message to Sam to say, Sam, I want you to respond now, because he's going to receive it that way. Right. So that's that's basically the simple answer to that question, Sam.
All right. And the other question that came in, do you have any suggestions on how to improve communications between manager and direct reports so that it's not always real time?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this question implies I have a message stream with my manager or vice versa. And every time my manager chats to me, I feel like I have to respond right away. So how do I sort of overcome that? That's sort of, does that feel like what the question is really asking, Sam?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I think the best thing to do, and there's lots of ways to do this, but if you could create a group in Workplace, which is a one-on-one group with each direct report, or if you have a manager, you should create this group and you call it Bill, Sam, one-on-one group, right? So Sam is my manager. I'll create this group and I'll proactively do it. And I'll say, this is our one-on-one group, and you can make it a secret group, right? So now when we have our weekly one-on-ones, I can go in with a post and say, topics for next one-on-one, January 3rd. And I can type in 2 bullet points. as I'm thinking about it, as the post, right? Sam can see that and say, oh, it started. I don't have to respond. It's there, right? Sam could also add a bullet point. Bill, I want to talk about this with you, and add it to as a comment or something. So anyway, a post is a way to do that. And if it's in a secret group, it implies, oh, I could post things for later, right? And the other person can respond later. And we can go back to it later, right? Even, hey, Sam, remember that thing we talked about in our last one-on-one? It was 2 weeks ago, or was it? It's easier to find that in a group than it is in a chat stream, for example.
Definitely. This was actually my question. When you say later, how long would you say later was? Like if someone posts something in a group and you're responding later, 24 hours, 48 hours, a week?
Yeah, that's the judgment call. I don't really know. I mean, if the message says, can you respond to me tomorrow before our meeting at 10 so I can add this thing to then right?
Yeah.
You know, Sam, you have said this to me. I'm working out loud right now for everyone listening. Sam has said this to me where it's, oh, I know, Bill, why you don't always respond.
Yep.
Right? Because I look at a message and sometimes I see the message and I know that I can respond to Sam the next time we meet. So I don't respond in the chat. Sometimes I do that. Right. And so that might not be a good decision in that moment because you needed a response sooner, possibly. Right. And so that's the judgment call you have to make. So there's no easy answer to that.
Well, that was great. That's the last question I had. I want to say thank you for all the attendees who came to the webinar today, and to all the attendees who are going to watch this webinar later on the interwebs, the internet. Thank you so much for your time. And Bill, this was fantastic. Can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And thanks for all attending. See you later. We'll send out the recording.
Bye, everybody.